I'm here with Margie Agin, the founder of a company called Centerboard Marketing. And Margie helps businesses basically create really great content marketing materials, digital experiences, helps them measure the impact that those things have on their revenue. And she really focuses also on, and I'm sure she'll talk more about this, strategic market research and inbound marketing campaigns, all things you need to be able to do in order to drive sales for your product or your service. So it's super important stuff because content marketing these days is gone bananas. Like everyone's doing it, but not everyone's doing it well. And I'm sure Margie will talk about that. So I'm really excited to have you on, Margie. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for this episode. Content marketing, just content in general, is obviously a huge interest of mine. Um, but I want to start just talking about you a little bit and kind of give the audience a feel for who you are and what you do on a kind of day-to-day basis. What are you working on?
Sure. So, Centerboard Marketing focuses mainly on B2B technology companies. So, companies of all types have kind of quote unquote discovered or embraced content marketing. For the technology company where the product is more complex and a little bit more difficult to explain, content marketing means uh, blogs, it means website, it also means sales enablement tools and implementation content. So it kind of runs the gamut of different types of content assets that we develop, starting from every step to the plan to the actual content development, and then, as you mentioned, measuring whether it's working after the fact.
hmm I remember when I was working on my other startup, Kaya, which was an analytics company geared towards digital publishers to help them understand how their audience was engaging with their content, what was working best for them. Our whole thing was about essentially making it so you could spend less time staring at numbers and more time actually creating that content that your audience is interested in. But what I was getting at was essentially we did a lot of content marketing on our end to help drive awareness and sales for our product at Kaya, and we did a couple things. One, we focused on blog posts, which was big, but essentially our focus for the blog posts, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, was thinking about what are our customers what are their needs, what do they need to know, and that's how we kind of decided what content to create. And then on top of that, we also launched a podcast, and this was in 2015. And so it was before podcasts started really blowing up again. It was like on the cusp of it. And essentially, what we did was we did this for two reasons. One, we thought the podcast would be an excellent kind of way to educate and inform people about the industry and the space, right? And by doing that, we spoke with different executives at these media companies and things like that, and we had them on, and it was very, very interesting. So that was one, to kind of bring awareness to our brand, but also what we're working on and the space. But also, it was a great way for us to get our foot in the door at places we wanted to sell to. And I think that's often overlooked as a reason for behind doing content marketing. You can really leverage it in many different ways aside from just the actual content that people are consuming themselves. But yeah, so
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned like at least three or four different reasons why you might want to create content.
mhm,
Building awareness, building your brand awareness. The point about answering customer questions is really key. Customers are, empowered in so many ways to self-service their questions, answer their questions before they ever talk to a salesperson.
right.
I've heard different numbers, but it's something like 6, 7, or even 8 pieces of content that consumers and even B2B buyers read before they ever talk to a salesperson,
hmm
right? So they're doing all their research ahead of time. The more you're educating them before they talk to a salesperson, you're doing a lot of things. You're weeding out people that, maybe aren't a good fit, or that you would have spent a lot of time trying to qualify or explain things to. Now they're kind of weeding themselves out, right? And
hmm
so by the time they get to a salesperson, they're much more educated. They're further along in their readiness to buy. and you can kind of get into the details, more quickly because they've already answered a lot of the upfront questions that they need to answer, and done a little bit of research on you. So those are kind of what you could call sort of top of funnel kind of reasons to do content.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also, ongoing relationships with customers, right? Once even someone is a customer, they need to get engaged with your product, make the most out of your product, become a fan and refer your product to other people.
Right.
So there's a lot of reasons for content, even beyond sort of that very top of funnel kind of brand awareness or even SEO focus, which is, mainly blog type content or ungated kinds of content for new prospects. You could think of content really every point down the sales funnel. And that's part of the upfront planning, is really understanding which of those goals is going to be most important to you, and thinking about your content as sort of this whole set of experiences, so that what I see is most companies, 90% of their content, it's funny, most companies, 90% of their content is either top of funnel stuff and it's all awareness,
Right,
or it's all technical product documentation, right? And no awareness. So, we're trying to sort of get something, at least in every stage of that buying cycle, to sort of even out the experience.
Right. Absolutely. So let's dive into this a little bit more. So, as for an early, let's say, to mid-stage company who's looking to get started in content marketing, what are some things they really should know? I mean, obviously we just discussed a few, but what should they really be thinking about before kind of diving in and getting started with all this? What should they know?
Yeah. So, I mean, one is sort of that plan. Think about what your real goals are. Where are the bottlenecks maybe that you're having now in your sales cycle? For example, you might be great at getting people to come to your website, but then they're not sticking around or they're not converting,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, or you may have just launched and nobody even knows about you. So your goal might be awareness, right? So just getting really clear on your goals. And then thinking about a realistic sort of cadence for how often you would be able to publish content, right? And one of the mistakes I often see companies making is thinking, okay, we're going to try to do, 2 blogs a week, right? And an ebook and a podcast, and we're going to promote this as an ongoing series. But then they don't have the resources,
The bandwidth,
to essentially publish.
Or the resources.
It takes publishing, thinking of the ideas, and also the approvers and the reviewers and all the mechanics behind the actual content creation.
It's a lot of work. I mean, people, it's funny because,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you get this all the time. People, that we want to do, like you just said, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to create this content, that kind of, it's like, well, that actual work has to be done to actually create these pieces of content. It's not like it doesn't just snap at,
not just the writing, right? But the approving
right.
is sometimes a bottleneck too. And so I think it's better to start small and focus rather than set an expectation that you're going to have like a newsletter every week or something, get people to sign up for it. And then you end up with sort of, the web is littered with like ghost towns
Right.
where blogs started, published 4 or 5 times, and then you never hear from them again, right?
Yep.
So it would be better to say, we're going to start with 1 a month, right? And spread it out, get used to the process, and then, and then build up from there.
Yeah.
So cadence, and then messaging. There's so much content out there. Content marketing is not a new concept, but over the last several years, everybody and their brother has realized and kind of become aware of the fact that they need more content on their website, on their blog, and social media, and so forth. So there's, a glut, more content than you could ever imagine. And I think 60% of that content is never even accessed or used. And even on, say, a single company's website, it might be just 5% of the content that you have that actually gets 95% of the action.
Right.
So, companies are creating and creating and creating sort of on this hamster wheel of production. But that's if they're able to produce, right? Then they're just sort of like producing and churning it out. But in fact, a lot of it is never used, or a lot of it's redundant, or it's just poorly written and poorly executed, or it sounds the same as what everybody else is saying, right? So you're
Right.
just kind of contributing
To
to
the
the
echo
noise.
chamber. Yeah.
and and so one thing that's very important to think about up front is, what can you contribute as an organization or as a thought leader, or whether it's as an individual or a company that has some kind of a unique perspective, right? Something that people haven't already heard a million times. um, it could even be controversial, something that kind of wakes people up, because obviously your company exists for a reason. You developed your company for a reason. You saw something in the industry that needed to be done, a different perspective that wasn't being done before. So this is sort of your platform to offer something unique instead of regurgitating what everybody else has already said.
Right. I remember when I was running Kaya, and I was doing a bunch of guest posting on various marketing blogs and things like that, like Performance In and Business to Community and stuff like, and sites like that. One of the things one of the pieces I published was about why the page view is dead, and like, that I think that's kind of what you were getting at, like. It can be controversial in the sense that, like, it's not maybe what everyone kind of, the line everyone toes or thinks, but at the, but it doesn't have to be like far out there. It can just be, with industry specific, controversial.
Right.
Right.
Some topic maybe that people are debating in your industry and
Mm-hmm.
you have a unique take on, or something that people are struggling with in your industry.
Right.
Right. And that's sort of the balance between, we use a lot of social listening tools, for example, or even SEO research to sort of get a sense of what are people talking about? What are some trending topics, right? What are common issues that people are dealing with? You could do this through customer research as well as some of these online listening tools.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got sort of a broad category of some trending topic, but then your role as a content marketer or a company that's producing content is not just to sort of report on that, right? We're not a newspaper. We're not doing
Right.
sort of like latest and greatest breaking news about what's happening in an industry. We're offering a perspective, or we're offering value or some kind of educational content to get people to think. And ultimately, and this is where content marketing drives the revenue, for them to sort of recognize that what they're doing, or maybe how they've thought of it before, leaves a gap. There's something that is missing, and your product or service has the ability to solve that problem that you've just raised
Right.
within
Right.
the content that you've written. So connecting the dots between the issue that someone's having, without being super salesy or pushing your product, but just
Right. I
raising
was actually going to
awareness
ask you,
and
like,
educating, right, the audience that, there's a different way to think about this.
definitely. What about one of the things I also wanted to ask you about in terms of getting started with content marketing? We talked about you're creating content, sometimes written, video, audio, but it doesn't really matter. The point is your brand, your company needs some kind of voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
How should people think about creating a voice or a brand these days, and also where should they be focusing most of their time? Is it should they be focusing on their website, or should they be focusing on places where their customer base or audiences, or
Yeah, those are two big questions. Yeah, so I guess let's look at the first one first, right?
okay,
The tone or the voice. So your voice involves what you say and how you say it, right? So what you say, what are you talking about that maybe most people disagree with you about, or where can you provide value, right? So that's sort of the topics that you're going to be known for, that you want to own. And then there's how you say it. So tone tone of voice kind of involves your word choice, your vocabulary, the structure. Do you speak in sort of very simple, easy to understand sentences, or are you more like sort of a poet in the way that poet is the wrong word, but do you have a certain
eloquence?
rhythm,
Yeah.
yeah, rhythm to the way that you speak, that is unique to kind of your personality?
Hmm.
These are things that can really make your brand seem more like a person, I mean,
Right.
more human. right?
I think that's a
So
key. I mean, a lot of brands these days are going with that human element to it, which I love. I think, I mean, yeah, you go back to like even back in the 80s and 90s, and it's like even the early 2000s. Before social media kind of blew up, brands were kind of like these dark figures over in the corner. Like
yeah,
you didn't really they sold products, but you didn't really know much about them or how they sounded, or like there was nothing, there was like no identity to them. It was just like, this is the brand. But now
well,
you
especially in a B2B
right,
space,
definitely.
people really used to think like if there were a brand, I, personalities are really for consumer companies, but
Hmm.
and B2B brands were much more,
Like your
suit and
brand is
tie,
your sales
navy
manager.
blue,
Yeah,
right, kind of thing. And now those brands are also
definitely.
becoming more distinct and using more human language and kind of calling on people's emotions as much as they are on logic. So, some of that is because you've got tech companies that are sort of more scrappy upstarts, and some of those are kind of trying to seem more like hip and cool, um, and then but not, you don't have to just be sort of like hip, cool, funny, scrappy startup, right? That's one type of brand personality. But there are many types of brand personalities that reflect the humanity of your business and sort of the people who work there. If you have a CEO or a founder of the company who has a really distinctive personality, a lot of times that person's sort of personality kind of drives the
Yeah,
voice of the company, at least in the early stages. But as the company grows and evolves and hires more people, and you still have a company culture, right? So if you ask people, what is it about this company that's different from other places you've worked, right? Or what would make somebody successful at this company? Um, that's one way to sort of get to the sense of your company's culture, so you can kind of try to reflect that in the way you communicate.
I like that.
The
I
other,
was gonna
yeah,
actually ask what questions you should ask
yeah,
yourself to do that, and those are good.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then the other piece is no matter how much you look inside, it's really important to hear what other people are saying about your company or you when you're not in the room, right? Because like it or not, your brand is also defined by what your customers think about you and how they would express what it's like to work with your company, right?
hmm,
So, and in fact, those are the words that they're saying, those are the words that they're using when they're telling someone else, yeah, you should check these guys out because blah, blah, blah. This is what they're like to work with. This is the experience I have working with that company. So if you have opportunities to kind of tap into um, customer perceptions about your brand and even hear the words that they use to describe you, that's a great way to sort of get out of your own box,
hmm,
um, where you can become extremely tunnel vision, only talking to the people that already know you and that you work with
right.
day in and day out. Everybody's speaking the same language. Get out of the box and start hearing what people are saying about you, and it can be very eye opening
For
to
sure.
understand how your brand is actually perceived by others.
Yeah, super. I mean, it's something that regardless of whether you have a brand voice or not yet, it's something you should be doing. Communicating with your customer or your audience base, and finding out, taking their feedback, taking their thoughts, taking what they're saying about you and your products, and kind of figuring out. I know one thing for me was kind of figuring out, all right, well, how does this apply to our roadmap? Should we prioritize differently based on what people are saying, what they're kind of talking about needing, or should we stay? And then those are decisions you have to make. At the end of the day, sometimes they're tougher
Sure.
than
Whether you're a
others.
product manager and you're thinking about product roadmap,
Right,
right?
exactly.
Or you're, a marketing person, a content person asking, all right, well, what are questions that you ask that come up during the sales cycle for
Yeah,
you, right? If you
exactly.
make a list of all the questions the customers ask, maybe you can that's
You can
great
create content
ideas,
out of
have
that. Exactly.
germinating ideas for content, right? And then
Exactly.
the brand person wants to know, okay, what's it like to work with us and interact with us? How would you describe us to somebody else? um, tell us about when we've sort of gone the extra mile and what that was like. All those things really factor into truly understanding where your company fits in the market and the role that you play in your customers' world. So many times we look at things from our own perspective, and what we want to say about ourselves, what we want to put out there,
Right.
but really we need to know what the customer, sort of what their context is, the world they're living in, so that we can understand the role we play in their life.
Definitely. So before we get to the next question, I just want to finish off
Yeah.
on that second part, which was in terms of deciding where to kind of distribute the content, and
Yep.
how should people be thinking about that? Because obviously that's part of the plan that you have to put together before you get started, figuring out, all right, where are we going to
Yeah.
distribute the content, and who are we kind of really targeting with it?
Sure. So, there's a whole debate about whether you sort of build on build your content hub on owned land, which might be your own website, or kind of what's called rented land, which is, say, a third party platform like a Medium, or some kind of a, LinkedIn blogging, something that's got a third party platform. And the danger is if everything you do is on a third party platform, any of those social media platforms could go away at any time, and then you don't have the content, and you also really haven't sort of captured the audience.
Right.
On the other hand, if you're a brand new brand, no one's coming to your website anyway, so
Right.
you've got to sort of, fish where the fish are.
Yep.
So um, I would say, even if you're starting on a third party platform, figure out where your users, where your customers hang out. You don't have to try to do everything.
Hmm.
I
Don't
some
spread
companies
yourself
are,
too thin.
they don't, their buyers aren't on Twitter. A tech buyer may not be on Twitter, but they're on LinkedIn, or they're in an online community like Spiceworks, or they're on some other type of a platform, Reddit or something like that. So you have to know where your audience actually hangs out,
Hmm.
and then think of ways that, even if you're capturing their attention on a third party platform, that you can drive them back to your own site for more.
Right.
Thinking of not just the one content piece over and done, they've read it, but what is the next step, and how can we get them, maybe back to your site to learn more, finding a way to capture their email address so that, you can have their permission to continue to market to them, a subscription for a newsletter, something like that, where, eventually you bring them back to your own site so that you can nurture the relationship. And then if that third party site goes away, at least you'd have something substantial that you
Definitely.
own.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great advice. Honestly, I've always been a huge fan and proponent of owning your own kind of hub. But obviously, I also think you need to be on other platforms too. You can't just kind of be on your own thing, especially as starting brand new. Or if you don't have an established kind of content marketing presence already, and not you just people are coming to your site, you can use your site to
Right.
kind of advertise the marketing materials you're creating, the content. But you should also be, on other platforms. And like I said, I
Yeah.
think one of the key things you have to keep in mind, especially when you're getting just started, is don't spread yourself or people in your company too thin. You got to kind of pick, like Margie was saying, you have to pick where the best places where your audience currently is, or your customer base, and
Right.
so you have to identify that. And in many cases, it's some kind of social platform, and that's where you should hang out first, right? That's where you start sticking, the flag in the ground and being like, all right, we're gonna set up shop here for a little bit,
Right.
and start engage. And the first thing is to engage. Don't just kind of
Right.
throw stuff out there. You gotta talk to people, right?
Well, exactly. That's what I was going to say, especially with, say, a platform like I mentioned, Reddit,
Mm-hmm.
right? You also, when you show up there for the first time, it's important not to be a bull in a china shop,
Right.
right? You're not there just to talk about yourself, but also to be part of the community. And that's especially when we're talking about social platforms and, technology communities, things like that. Um, it's not just a platform for you. So knowing how to engage and what the context is, again, of the users that you're engaging with, and sort of the rules of the road, is
Right.
really important when you're entering into somebody else's space. So even though that, like that voice we were talking about, brand voice, it can be consistent across different platforms. You want to be known as a brand that would be recognized for having a certain type of tone of voice. But that doesn't mean you speak exactly the same way no matter where you go, right? Like you wouldn't speak sort of to your best friend the same way you would as your grandmother. So in the same way, you're going to need to sort of adjust a little bit on a social media platform like a Reddit. That might be very different from how, you engage if you're talking to and, you're writing an analyst report or something like
Right.
that. They're talking to an IT person with technical documentation. So, knowing sort of fitting into the platform is also very important.
100% agree. And especially on Reddit and sites where there are very community oriented, you definitely, like you said, know the rules of the road, read the rules for each subreddit or whatever platform you're on. Make sure that, you're not you don't want to break those rules, and, it looks bad for you and your brand. You
Well, you'll
definitely,
get kicked off.
right, exactly. You'll
Or
get
you'll
kicked
get
off.
banned. That's
Exactly.
not good. That's not
They don't
good.
care who you are. If you're not following the rules, then tough luck for
Right.
you. But yeah, so I feel like we could talk about this kind of topic forever, Margie. But I wanna also talk about which something we actually kind of hit on a little bit, but let's dive into a little bit more, which is how to finding relevant topics for content.
Mhm.
I think this is something that a lot of people in this space have trouble with, and for good reason. It's not
Yeah.
easy. um,
Yeah.
so what kind of tips or advice do you have in terms of thinking about ways to maybe frame a topic, like, because obviously, like we were talking about before, you don't want to kind of just regurgitate and do the same thing other people are doing.
Yeah.
You got to come up with a way that reflects you and your company and your brand, and stays true to that, but also offers value for your audience and customer base. So how should
Right.
we be thinking about this?
So one thing we touched on with the customer interviews is listing out every possible question or your salespeople can tell you this too, right? What questions have come up during the sales process that customers or prospective customers are struggling with, right? What kind of things do they ask you? Either when they're making a choice or they're trying to understand if your product is the best fit for them, or just at any point in the implementation, right? So that's one great source. Just keep that list. Um, so the other thing we look at with a social listening tool, you could even use Google Trend, Google Trends to look at, what keywords are being searched, what topics are really kind of trending in the news. You can think about what is happening in your industry or in the business and in the world. Take COVID, right? Everybody in the entire world has had to adjust in some way, right, to the current situation, right? So if you think about that's like at the very broadest level, there's nobody that has not been impacted by that sort of international worldwide trend.
Exactly.
There could be similar trends, as you go down into each individual industry, um, compliance requirements, new legal changes, technology breakthroughs, right? Changes in sort of companies buying other companies, you know. So thinking about, okay, well, how does that actually change things? More people are working from home. That impacts, work-life balance. It impacts security. It impacts education. So
Everything. Yeah.
all of the sort of the right, all of the ways that some kind of change, is causing people to think about how they do their work, the type of technology choices they make, right? So that's what there has to be some kind of a trigger reason that shakes up the status quo to basically get people to pay attention, and start trying to think, well, maybe there's another way to do something. So the more you can kind of tap into any kind of a trend that is causing change. Change is uncomfortable for a lot of people. And so, how do you help them adapt and adjust to the change with whatever your product and service is to sort of make that less painful for them? You got to find your own way into that conversation that's appropriate for you. But thinking about it that way and it helps you understand, again, the customer's context and how you can sort of tap into what they're already thinking about. And then it doesn't seem like your conversation comes out of the blue, but it's more tied to the struggles they're already having.
Right. I want to give one example that I'm thinking of right now. It just popped in my head. Something I did a while back, actually, when I was working at a company called Mashwork. One of the things I was doing was manning the blog, because at this time we were still like a very small company. I was like employee number 6 there, and and in addition to my other daily duties, I wrote blog posts. And anyway, what this company did was social media listening and analytics for different brands like HBO, Gatorade, etc. And this was, I think, 2012 or so, and the Mars Curiosity rover had just kind of landed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
in simpler times.
Right.
So I had this idea, and this was one of the most popular posts that we had actually written. So I started doing a bunch of social listening on what people were saying on social media about the rover landing and things like that. So I put together this whole kind of research and report on that, and published an article that was relevant because it was newsworthy and timely, and also because it's literally what people are talking about right now. And it was a great way for us to kind of show kind of our skills, show kind of the work we could do and the insights we could give to you if you worked with us, but in a more fun kind of, way. So
yeah. So there are those opportunities that something happens almost like in popular culture, right, where you can kind of tap into. So this is also sort of an older example, but do you remember a few years ago when this was Ellen, who I think was hosting the Emmys, right? She took that famous picture with everybody in it, Bradley Cooper, and like everybody was leaning in, and she took the picture. And it was like the most tweeted at that time, right? Like the tweet that had the most reaches of all time at that point, right? So there was a company I was working with that was a law firm, somebody that did essentially like intellectual property and other types of help people with corporate legal issues, right? So what does this law firm have anything to do, right, with this Twitter situation that Ellen started? So they wrote a blog about asking the question, who owns that picture?
It's a good question.
Right? Yeah. So do you know the answer?
No, Ellen, maybe?
The Emmys.
Whose phone was it?
People that were in the picture. No, it was Ellen. It was the person who took the picture.
Mm-hmm.
Owned the picture. Right. And they were able to sort of use that as an example and leverage that as an example of, ownership of creative materials, right? If you're a designer, if you're a writer, if you're, a television producer, who actually owns it and how do you determine that?
Right.
So it's sort of that idea of newsjacking to say, here's something that's kind of cool that people are talking about. The headline would actually get picked up because people are searching for this keyword. Right. But we found a way to turn that actually into something that's relevant for our audience, which are lawyers that care about intellectual property.
Right. That's a great idea. I mean, so that actually also kind of reminds me of the monkey that took the selfie and whether the monkey could actually own the rights to the selfie.
The monkey owned it.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, that's a great point. So I want to move on a little bit, and let's talk about essentially once you start creating the content. So I feel like we're going through the whole process here. Once you start creating the content, how do you know if it's even working? Like what metrics should we be looking at?
Right.
What metrics do you look at to help companies determine whether the content that they're creating is drumming up business for them or is working in the way that they intended?
Yeah. So we talked a lot about blogs so far, and blogs are typically ungated content, right? So we don't always necessarily know, who's read it. They're not filling in a form to access it, right? But there are some things that we can tell, right? So a lot of people are creating blog content, ungated web content for search engine optimization, right? So optimizing content to include keywords and making sure that it shows up on search engines for particular searches. So if that's a primary goal, we can tell how well that blog has ranked in search engine results, right? That's a brand awareness indicator. We can tell how much traffic has come in specifically due to that blog, right? So that could be one key metric. You're looking for web traffic. Specifically, you might be looking at new users, right? Because you're trying to attract new audiences. You can tell a lot of that through Google Analytics. And then there's other things you can tell through Google Analytics with just a little bit of customization, like how much time have they, not just how much time have they spent on the blog, because that can sort of be, a little bit of a weird stat, because they might have left and gone and gotten a drink of water and not been engaged.
Could
but
happen.
You can tell, did they actually scroll to the bottom of the post, right? Or did they stop at the first paragraph and get bored, or have they actually scrolled to the bottom of the page, right? We can tell that. We can tell if it's a video, how long they're watching the video, things like that actually give you an indication of engagement. And then we can tell, what did they do after reading that blog? Did they click off your site, never to be heard from again? Or have they then navigated possibly to some, what you've decided are really high value pages on your website, or maybe even eventually converted by requesting a demo or filling in a form or some other conversion goal that's important, particularly to a B2B website, or bought something if it's a B2C website. So their engagement is often a key metric for something like a blog, to say, all right, at least we're getting people interested in our story and we're starting to capture their attention and they're sticking around to learn more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the blog side,
yeah,
other, gated content like an ebook or a white paper or a webinar, those require more investment on the part of the reader. So usually you're asking them to fill in some kind of a form submission. So in that case, then they're going into your CRM or your Salesforce or something, and then we can actually track what happened to that, that inquiry, that prospect, after they filled in that form. So a salesperson might follow up, and you'd be able to actually track back the eventual sale to the fact that this piece of content brought them in.
Do you think it's more important to? I guess it really depends on whether what you're trying to do, but ultimately, would you? I mean, how much should you kind of try and get a new visitor, a prospect, to kind of sign up for your email newsletter? Like how much should people be pushing that in their content marketing?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of test and see. I don't think there's a straightforward answer to that. It depends on how complex your sale is or your product is, right? I think that a lot of times I see, particularly B2B tech websites, pushing the free trial, or pushing the are you ready for a demo? Do you want to talk to a salesperson? Like right away.
Mm-hmm.
And often it's not until the person has read a few articles, maybe watched a video, visited the site a couple of times, until they're actually ready for that. So it can be kind of in your face to constantly being asked, are you ready to talk? Are you ready to talk? Are you ready to talk? On the other hand, I have definitely had the experience where companies have gone the other way, taken all that off the site, and then found that, their sales pipeline has significantly decreased. And so I think that you have to kind of test and see, and find the right balance that works for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're right on the money with that. It's definitely one of those things you have to test, because every audience is different, right? I mean, your audience is not the same as my audience. And you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so what I do may not work for you. And that's why that testing is obviously so important. Do you have any tools that you recommend for testing this kind of stuff?
I've used a lot of different kinds of things. All the marketing automation tools like an Eloqua or Marketo can give you great insights into that. even like some user testing tools like Hotjar, where you can say, well, how do people react when they have a form on this page versus not a form on this page?
Right. A/B
Lately,
testing
I've
can be
seen,
helpful for the especially with showing like trying to get people to sign up with their email or a form of
yeah,
some kind with
right,
your content. An A/B test could be a very helpful kind of tool
right,
to use to see whether it's performing better when that's there or when it's not
yeah.
there.
Right, or how many fields you have,
Right,
right? I mean, we
exactly.
kind of know intuitively, and we can prove the fact that the more fields, the more people are going to be worried and shy away from filling in a form, right? So you can make that experience a lot smoother for them by just asking fewer things and maybe coming back the next time and asking another couple questions, and slowly gaining their trust over time. A key to that is that when they do fill in that form, and they get that gated content that they've been willing to invest their personal information into getting, that you really are providing value. There are certain things that I would not gate, like a case study, or a video, or an infographic. I think it's much
Too
more
low value.
effective
Yeah.
or a blog, right? There's a certain amount of information that you want circulating and that you want people to be able to have access to. But if you're creating, a 20-page ebook with all kinds of interesting, tips and tricks and advice and examples and, calculations, then that's a worthwhile piece of content that there's an exchange of value when somebody actually gives you their information. They're going to expect to have something meaty in return.
Definitely like that. All right, I want to go to the last question for this. I feel like we've been talking
Sure.
about a lot of really great stuff, and I think I'm gonna have to have you come back because like we didn't even get to all the questions that we had. But I'm gonna jump to this before we get
Oh,
to the
you're my
lightning
favorite
round.
topic.
It's one of my one of my favorites too. Um, this one I think is a good one. Why do most launch
Yeah.
projects fail, in your opinion? Like, what have you seen? What are some of the telltale signs that people should be looking out for or be wary of when they're doing this, like to avoid
So,
failure?
right. I mean, it's expensive if you're going to rebrand your company, right? Or whether it's just a fresh coat of paint, or it's a full on, rejiggering of the messaging and as well as the look and feel. So it's the potential risk that you're going to get it wrong, or that you will have invested a lot of time and energy and money, and then it just kind of never gets off the ground. So what I what I often see is companies that spend a lot of time on sort of the marketing backroom strategy, maybe with an agency or maybe with the company leadership. And then they sort of deliver their new brand idea from above to the rest of the organization. And guess what? Lo and behold, it's not embraced or adopted by the organization because they didn't see it coming. They didn't have a lot of buy-in up front. And they also aren't really sure how to actually execute that brand in their day-to-day lives.
They could
So,
be out of
I
touch
think,
with the everyday kind of employee who's there, who's working with the customer on a day-to-day basis. They, like we were talking about earlier, get that feedback. It's very important because it impacts how you kind of brand yourself and
right,
your company. So
right. And, I mean, so it's no surprise that, at least half of people working in companies say they don't really buy into their own company's brand, right? So if they don't buy into it, then how are they supposed to explain it and get their customers to buy into it? So they're not fully equipped to be ambassadors, brand ambassadors. Um, so in addition to sort of the high-minded, high big picture kind of brand definition, where the rubber meets the road is actually equipping the people who are on the front lines to express the brand in the way they write, in the way they communicate, even in the emails that the customer service team sends, in the way the website is structured, in the way the phone calls are answered, so that the brand becomes meaningful to the way they actually do their jobs, and they don't have to guess and interpret. Right? So if you say like, "Oh, we have a open and approachable brand," that could mean many different things to many different people, and left on their own, they're all going to interpret that a different way.
right.
So I like to give like real examples, whether they're sample templates or they're sample scripts or a blog or an ebook, something that really says, show it this way, this works, this way doesn't work. And not to say everybody is a robot and needs to speak with exactly the same words, but that you have some realistic examples of how you might actually put a brand definition into practice. And that way people can be more consistent.
Definitely. Consistency is the name of the game here. We talked about consistency with regard to making sure you get content out consistently, making sure your brand's voice is consistent across all platforms that you're on. Those are two super important things that you need to do for when you're doing content marketing for your company.
Yeah,
absolutely. So Margie, I love the conversation we had so far. It is time for the lightning round. Actually, you made it all the way through. So whenever you're ready, you let me know. We'll get started.
Okay.
Are you ready? All right,
I'm ready.
Here we go. Bedroom, office desk, or car? Which one would you clean first?
Bedroom.
Bedroom. Would you rather live a week in the future or relive a week in the past?
Relive a week in the past.
Book or ebook?
Ebook.
Would you ever...
Ebook meaning like a Kindle book?
Yeah, like a Kindle book.
Okay, yes. Mm-hmm.
Would you ever fly to the moon or another planet?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. I think I would do that too, assuming I could get back. I think.
Well, you didn't ask that part of the question.
That's true. I didn't. And that's intentional. Last one. Here we go. What's your cure for hiccups?
I have an 8-year-old son who had the hiccups the other day. So we were playing the, scare me without me being ready for it game. It didn't really work.
I found peanut butter works for me. At least lately.
That one. I'm going to try that one.
Definitely try it out. Let me know.
Drink a glass of water upside down.
I've heard that too.
How that works.
I've tried that. It's very difficult. You have to kind of like lean over and to drink it. I wouldn't try that one. Peanut butter is the way to go. Oh, well, Margie, I'm really glad that we had you on for this episode. If anyone who's listening who wants to get in touch with you, ask you a question, talk to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best way is my website,
okay.
centerboard-marketing.com. Or to connect with me directly, just hit me up on LinkedIn. It's Margie Agin, Agin, and love to connect with your listeners.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Margie. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Me too. Thanks very much. It's a lot of fun.